What's going on to all my White Lotus fans out there, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Elliot and this is MovieFiles. We are back with our weekly White Lotus discussions, and today we're breaking down season 2 episode 3, which was titled Bull Elephant, an episode that shines a light on how our characters view male masculinity, as well as we get a sense and a theme of what it's like to be lonely for some of these characters. We have so much to break down. I'm so excited to be back with you all, but before we get into the breakdown, if you all haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel and make sure you all hit that notification bell. That way you can stay up to date with all my White Lotus content. You can also give me a follow on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. All those links can be found in the description of this very video. Which, speaking of this video, if you enjoyed my breakdown of the White Lotus, make sure you give it a thumbs up, as well as sharing it to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about this show. But more importantly, let's have a discussion about this third episode. Again, masculinity, loneliness, cheating on your spouse, not being a victim, and all the different things that we get in this episode. Your thoughts, where you think things are going to head after the events, after the end of this episode. Tanya and that fortune teller, let's talk about it all in the comments below. With all that being said, let's get into the breakdown. Full spoilers ahead. As we open up this new episode, and before we even get into the breakdown here, let me just take a moment to just applaud the amazing cinematography and the score that this show has to offer, especially when we open up this first scene. We're just looking at the beauty of Sicily. Again, never been there. I want to go there tomorrow after watching these episodes, man. It's just so breathtaking. I just wanted to take a moment to just applaud the beautiful cinematography as we get into the breakdown. As I mentioned last week, it would be nice to get more scenes with Valentina as we actually open with this kind of morning routine for her as she's getting a cup of coffee, and pay attention to how some of our female characters, how they're getting this unwanted attention right in this episode, and just wants to be left alone as this guy is bothering her getting coffee. And not that he was rude, he was just, hey, how you doing? And she's like, I'm doing good, but I don't want to talk to you, right? I just want to go about my day. As she does, runs into Ethan, which there's something's happening there with the whole him running to characters. It makes you, again, we got to remember that there's someone's going to die, not just one person, but multiple people are going to die as we see him running by her, but also just going back to Valentina for a hot second, because as I mentioned last week, I would love to learn more about this character. She just seems to be mad all the time, right? But this episode did two things for me. Number one, as we see later on in the episode, not to jump too far ahead, but she does have vulnerable side. She has a nice side when she's feeding those stray cats and on her lunch break. And also, we'll talk about later when she gets admired by Isabella. So there's a lot going on with her. Well, I should say not a lot on paper, but there's something there with the actress that just makes me want to learn more about her. And we also see another thing about her in this episode. She's alone a lot. Now, I don't know if that's on purpose, if it's just her personality, but I'm liking how each episode has slowly but surely given us a little bit more of Valentina, and it makes you wonder if she's going to be very pivotal to the rest of the show. Let me know how you all feel about her so far and what we got from her in this episode. As we transition into other characters waking up, we see Dom with both Lucia and Mia in his room as he's rushing them off and giving them the payment, but Bert sees them leaving, which he just keeps bringing it up in front of Albie later in this episode. But we also see Harper is ready to show her husband this new side of her, and she's not going to be all mad or judgmental, and she's showing him that she doesn't dislike morning, and in particularly doesn't dislike morning sex, as she is all dolled up and like, hey, let's have some morning fun, right? And I want to bring this up now, and I'm going to bring it up later. Ethan's just like, oh, hey, okay, I'm open to seeing this new side. Don't put on a front, don't be too phony, but sure, let's see how this different side of Harper's going to be. But I want to go back to her again, trying to be more sexually active with her husband. And this is not only in this episode. Y'all remember last week, she did the same thing when she was like, well, do you want me to help you finish? She's like, no, I'm good. Two questions. Is Ethan attracted to his wife? Because listen, y'all told y'all in episode 1, I'm a big Aubrey Plaza fan because yes, she's extremely, amazingly talented, but I also have a crush on her. I'm not going to lie, guys. I found her to be very beautiful, and also her personality just kind of fits right on my alley as I put my dating profile aside here. But seriously, is he attracted to her? Secondly, are they, and correct me if I'm wrong if you're getting these similar vibes, but I felt it more in this episode, is he maybe bisexual or maybe gay. And the reason I say that, especially a little bit later in the episode when he's like watching, Cameron having sex with Lucia, but I'm just curious because they kept, as you remember very early on in the season, Cameron said, I'm just so happy for him to find you, because in college he never was around girls, he never dated girls. So I'm wondering if this is one of those situations where like a young man that has this company and he has like these type of male masculinity as a big theme in this episode. And we'll get to the meaning of the title, at least how I perceived it. But like for him, he's just like checking off a box, like, okay, I have to marry, I have to have this traditional trajectory of successful business, wife, maybe kids, but it's really not who he really is. Let's have those conversations in the comments below. But meanwhile, we transition over to Greg, who is preparing to leave, and Tanya just watches him. I think it's safe to assume that she didn't confront him from listening to his conversation, especially what we find out from her later in this episode, which she can't seem to face the music. She can't seem to face the facts, right? Especially we saw that from season 1 with her and her mom, which some people mentioned in the comments. Was that really her mom that she was letting off in the ocean? Was that maybe her dad? But neither here nor there. We'll talk about Tanya a little bit later. But let's get into what's going on with the breakfast scenes and going back to this new version of Harper. As she is complimenting the sky, she's acknowledging Daphne's clothes and clearly not being herself, right? And in this scene, the question that she's starting to kind of pose is just like, okay, let me just try to put on this front for a second. And that's something I love about the show, how characters try to do something different. They're trying to be different. And we got that from Dom, right? I think those two characters have a lot of common trajectories in their characters so far where they're trying to do something new. Dom obviously wants to get his family back, but also we see Harper, who has a growing family, but she's not meshing well with her husband so far. So I'm kind of liking what's going on there. But questions for the couples out there, and just tying it into what's going on with Harper and her husband Ethan. Would you prefer your partner to act a certain way to appease your group of friends, or do you want them to be themselves through and through 24/7 all the time? No right or wrong answers. Just kind of curious and posing that question to you all. But getting back into the discussion, are we starting to see the cracks in that perfect couple? And I'm referring to Daphne and Cameron. Y'all remember in my first review, I'm like, they're hiding something, man. There's something. They're not as perfect as they seem. And then episode 2 kind of changed my tone because I'm like, oh, they lost, they almost lost their kid. They almost lost Daphne. So maybe they have a new perspective on life. But this episode showed us nothing's perfect. And there's some trouble in paradise, which we'll get into. But we're starting to see Daphne, she's talking about she wants to go to No, I believe was the town that she was referring to. I might be wrong there, but she wants to go there. She wants to get Christmas presents. And then we see Cameron like, honey, it's like the middle of the summer. You're thinking about Christmas? She's like, well, I really want to come here to go to this special town, to go shopping and do something I want to do, right? And we see Harper's like sipping her, whatever she was drinking, like, oh, maybe they're not perfect, right? Harper's loving all that. And I got a really good kick out of that moment. And we'll talk more about I don't want to say cracks in their relationship, but we see more layers and the more complexities and the acceptance and the not being a victim in their relationship that I really got a really good bit of sense of who they are as people in their relationship. So we'll talk about that later. But it doesn't stop Daphne from inviting Harper to go on this trip with her, and Harper couldn't be happier. We'll get into them in a little bit, but let's catch in with our young maybe couple to be in Albie and Portia, as we see Albie apologize for not going into her room the previous night because he didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable. Again, I want you all to notice the masculinity and the different men in this show, and especially how Albie views the older generation, right? He doesn't want to become his granddad. He doesn't want to become Dom. So he didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable. And things kind of change, right? A little bit later. And again, this is yet another character who's trying to change to appease, that's not his girlfriend, but he's trying to change himself to maybe be her, this vacation boyfriend. Again, I want you to notice who's changing themselves in this episode. Harper's trying to make a change. Albie's trying to make a change. We see Tanya trying to beg her husband to stay. There's a lot of different characters. Dom's trying to make a change. Pay attention to that. I'm loving how it's so subtle in this episode, but it's very prominent as well. So getting into Portia, she opens up to a little bit more, and she's talking about her being depressed at times, and she questions life is boring, right? And I'm liking what they're doing with her character so far, because I think we've all, at least I'll just speak for myself, where sometimes it is kind of scary looking at today's society, especially the reliance on technology, and the human connection seems to grow further and further apart as we go from year to year, decade to decade. So I like what they're kind of bringing to the table with that character. And again, I understand her kind of, and she's very young, right? I would assume that her character is in her early 20s, and I think they might have said that she's just getting out of college. So she's at that age where normally that age group, or particularly this generation, wouldn't be thinking about stuff like that. So I like how she's just not your stereotypical younger generation who just doesn't care about anything. Almost, and not that last year's characters didn't care about anything, Sydney Sweeney's character and her friend, I believe it was Jordan, but she seems to be a little bit more open to life and also seeing things not from just the sense of her phone, right? And she's open to having these more intellectual conversations. So I like her very much so far. But Albie is taking her advice because she wants him to be more aggressive. And you see him, again, another character trying to change to appease someone. He is being more aggressive as he invites her to the Grassos day to visit the set or to visit key locations for the film The Godfather, which we know Bert was watching last week. But let's talk about Tanya, who's in tears as she doesn't want Greg to go and questions if he wants to remove the prenup, which we talked about that last week. Is she trying to take her money and whatnot? But this is a big reveal here. We find out from Greg, he's like, just stop crying. I'm going to be back in 2 days or whatever. And we'll talk about the fortune teller a little bit later in the breakdown. But we find out that Tanya was his savior because, as we know, she has the dollar bill. With her money, she was able to afford him the best doctors to not, I don't think they said that whatever his terminally ill sickness is removed, but he said that it bought him more time on earth. He's able to live more. And then pay attention to what Tanya says. Now that you're able to have a longer life, now you don't want to be with me, which goes back to maybe him, if he is a scammer, if he isn't a scammer, and he just kind of was on vacation. Again, I'm very curious to know more about Greg and who is this lover that they're referring to a little bit later. But maybe it was a circumstance was like, you know what? I'm dying. Sure, let's get married. Let's have a vacation together. So very curious on that. But again, I found it to be a very big reveal that she essentially not saved his life, but gave him more time on earth with the money in her pocket. Very interesting there. But she's a mess. She is just, again, crying. And there's so many great shots in this episode. There's this very eerie shot of this statue that appears to be crying as well. So, and there's a couple different various shots in this episode that shows you just like a lonely statue just being like in shock or crying. So again, the way that they frame our character's mindset and they impose like a piece of art to kind of invoke the emotion that's going on with that character. Again, I just love how the show just weaves in the environment that they're in and how they're in this beautiful place in Sicily, but yet they have all these tragic, dark thoughts and they're just not as happy as you think someone would be on these beautiful locations. So I just love that kind of how they weave that into the script. But let's catch up with Mia and Lucia, who are spending the money that they got earlier from Dom. And we actually find out that Mia did not sleep with Dom that night, but she feels like she deserves half that money. And she tells her, in order to make money, you gotta spend it. Speaking of money, we transition over to Daphne and Harper leaving their husbands as they say their goodbye. And I love the brilliance of how they frame shots. They're saying goodbye to their wives. Meanwhile, they're saying hello to Lucia and Mia, who they become friends with a little bit later. So again, bye, honey. Hello, darkness. I just love that kind of that frame and how all that came into play. But as we have this conversation here about male masculinity within cinema, as Albie disagrees that The Godfather is considered to be one of the most cinematic masterpieces, rather than it's a male fantasy film filled with violence, sexual affairs, and no questions asked about their wives and The Godfather and other movies and other stuff like that. So I'll say this. I don't have a dog in that fight with that particular film. I haven't seen The Godfather in like literally years. So I remember some of the beats, but not all the beats. But to be fair, in regards to what he's alluding to as far as just the landscape of how media portrays or entertainment portrays male masculinity. And yes, I can totally agree with that sentiment that there are movies and shows that are targeted towards male audiences. It was like, woo-ha, men, war films, action films. It's just like makes the male audience want to run through a wall after after seeing an Avengers film or whatnot. And it does check off a box, right? Glorifying violence, glorifying affairs, glorifying just kind of the wife is only known for this and the man's the breadwinner. So yes, there are lots of media that covers that. And there's also lots of media that covers the other spectrums, right? There, as time goes along, we're seeing more of, female-led stories, people of color like myself-led stories. So there's that conversation that's just much wider than this episode in regards to how media tries to put out certain content and how sometimes it's an agenda, sometimes it isn't, but there's a whole thing about that. But let me know what you all thought about that. But I want to tie this into the title of this episode, which again, the title of this episode was titled Bull Elephant. Now, if you look up bull elephant, you'll find that that's what they call male elephants. And when they are mature and they begin going into a particular period of their life, which is referred to as musth, which is categorized by high levels of testosterone and spurts of energy, during which they show heightened aggression, unpredictability. Again, tying that title into our male characters in masculinity and aggression and unpredictability. There are a couple characters that we see that in. I'm looking at you, Cameron, and that high level of testosterone and unpredictability and just the spurts of energy and how he's engaging with the women in this episode. I find that to be a perfect title for this episode. So let me know what you all think about the title, the conversation about masculinity, the conversation about masculinity in cinema and TV, and just the conversation in general. Let's talk about it. But getting back to what's going on with Greg and Tanya, or I should say Greg lists Tanya, who is looking for a fortune teller and calls Portia back to work ASAP. Meanwhile, we see Albie believes that it's his father's fault that she's leaving this trip early, and we're seeing this bond of this granddad, son, and father. It's starting to become a failure, this vacation. And we'll talk about the Grassos a little bit later, because Dom, he's trying to make a change, but can he stick with it? So going into Harper and Daphne arriving to the location, and surprise, surprise, she's booked them an overnight stay, forcing Harper to stay with her and leaving the men alone to bond, which we'll talk about those men and what they're doing when their wives are not in town, which let's just actually get right into that, as Cam is proud of Ethan for his accomplishment at the age of 36, but Cam also wished that Ethan may have given him the heads up on selling his company recently, and is looking like Cameron has a hidden agenda, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk about this agenda, because as he's talking about, man,
you should give me a heads up. Yeah. What? I have to hear from Gary Pizzanat that you sold your company for a shitload, and by then, it's too late for me to do anything with it.
And for new clientele, right? And he's getting into this conversation about, okay, I want you to be my new client. Let's do this. And Ethan's kind of like forcefully, he's like, okay, sure, we'll look into that. But again, I'm like, oh, okay, Cameron, were you just inviting Ethan and his wife on this vacation because you wanted him to be your next client? Again, we're seeing that onion being peeled back. Y'all remember episode 1, I'm like, man, Cameron and Daphne are hiding something. Episode 2, I'm like, man, they're just sweet people that, sure, they're rich and snobby, but they got hearts too. But now we're starting to see who they really are as we get into day 3 on this 7-day vacation. So let me know if you all took that scene as Cameron's playing Ethan, that he just wants to use him for a new clientele and to put more money in his pocket. And again, people are using people. We see that a lot in that show. In this show in particular, I should say. Let me know your thoughts on that development. And also just kind of looking at it again, comparing to how characters are using one another. Example, Greg using Tanya. Example, Tanya using Portia. Another example, Lucia using Dom. And now we could say Cam maybe using Ethan. And maybe we see Daphne using Cam as we get into this scene here, as she tells Harper that she's playing mental games with him when it comes to him suffering from FOMO and abandonment issues, which would explain the conversation that Cameron's having with Ethan, because he felt left out. You didn't give me the chance to win you over as a client. You didn't tell me you were selling your company. Abandonment issues much, Cameron? FOMO issues, Cameron? I love that little kind of, little seed of getting us some information as an audience about who his personality and what he kind of deals with when he's not as, raw man type of individual. He's vulnerable. He's got some layers to him. But going into it here, they appear to both be playing games and hide and seek, as we're seeing this relationship is very interesting and very complex, as she calls Cam, tells him the news, and it definitely catches him off guard. And again, they're playing this mental gymnastics. He's like, okay, you're going to go on this vacation or go on this night trip and not tell me? I'm going to one-up you, honey. And again, we're seeing that toxicity in the relationship. But again, no one's a victim in this relationship, as we'll talk a little bit about later. But meanwhile, Tanya and Portia, who has to wait in the bathroom while she is talking to this fortune teller, and she is ready to listen. She wants to know if their relationship, and referring to Tanya and Greg, will last. As the card reader or the fortune teller is reading her fortune, she gets the information that Greg is in love with someone beautiful, but it ain't Tanya, and she does not want to hear that. Again, we have seen multiple times that Tanya does not want to face the music. She does not want to face reality, which again, sometimes people, when they have so much money, they sometimes feel detached from just human emotions and just what's really the facts going on, right? But she is upset, and she tells, she kicks her out because, again, she says it's all being negative. And I'm very curious because if you all remember in that scene, the fortune teller had something else to tell her. She was very kind of not like out of control, but she was like, whoa, there's one more thing. But she kicked her out before she could tell her that. I think that one more thing was something about someone's fortune is going to be dark and bleak. One of them is going to die. Tanya, Greg, Portia, put your thoughts on that in the comments section. But as we catch up to Dom, who wants Albie to tell his mom that he's trying to make a change and that he's sorry. And we see Albie actually being the almost father figure as he's giving his father advice, telling him you have to change. And we see Dom says, I will change. I promise you, I'm going to make that change. We're going to see if he does a little bit later. But as we pivot over to Daphne and Harper, who look absolutely amazing on this trip, and they're going into town, and we see Harper, all the men are looking at her, which makes me think about Valentina, the men unwanted attention and not... She doesn't want to take on this kind of relationship that, and not that Daphne takes on like men looking at her. She says it early in the episode, why do men in Italy wear their pants so tight? But I feel like Harper is trying to put on these blinders. She's like, I don't care about these men looking at me. I only care about Ethan. And we'll talk about Ethan and his affairs a little bit later. But I just found that scene to be so funny. And speaking of Daphne here, who is looking to have some fun, she takes out her edibles and she's having the reverse conversation of what the Grassos were talking about earlier, which was male masculinity. Well, what is it like to be a woman, right? She's talking about, do you like being a woman? And we hear Harper's like, well, yeah, I guess so. As we see Daphne get into the conversation, talking about how men are so competitive and that she loves that she's a woman because they are so competitive as the males. And she mentions that it's almost like the wildlife.
And on safari, you see all these pods of elephants, and they're all like bathing in the river and playing with each other. And it's so sweet, but it's just the moms and the babies. Because when the boy elephants get too big, they kick them out of the pod.
The title, Bull's Elephant, as only to find out that they're just alone. And I love how the very next scene, we see literally that being played out. This is the coolest thing that they ever done in their lives. They feel like they're so important, right? And it ties back to what Daphne was just saying, how men sometimes get in this frame of mind where they feel like they're the shit. I love that kind of how they frame that up from one scene to the next. Again, this show, the way they frame things to me is just so beautifully composed. But as we transition from morning, afternoon, now it's time to get into the night scenes, as we see Dom has changed as he's meeting with Mia and Lucia at dinner, and he tells them, this is the end. Our week of fun is going to be cut short because I want to change. I want to be a better father. And he didn't say all the stuff about maybe getting back in his relationship, but that's really what, as an audience, we know that is his end game. I would love if Laura Dern can pop up as his wife, but we see that he pays for the dinner, and Lucia takes it pretty well at first, but she's going to look for other men. And Ethan, who we'll talk about here in a second, as we see that he has officially started to make a change. But speaking of a change, I'm loving the change of pace as we get back to Valentina, who we see Isabella, one of her workers, admires her. She appreciates the way that she talks to men and also appreciates how she works and her work ethic. And she just asks her, why are you working so much and all this stuff? And again, the actress that plays Valentina is doing such a great job because, again, she can be stern, she can be mean, some may say, but she has a heart, as we saw with the cats. But again, is she alone because she wants to be alone, or is it because she just has this maybe personality where she's not as welcoming? Let's talk about that in the comments. But getting back into Cameron here, who isn't a faithful individual, and he shares his thoughts on this complicated relationship that he has, and also his ideas on monogamy and his philosophies on that. He's cheated on his wife, and we're going to talk about how Daphne feels about that. But meanwhile, he has his eyes set on for some prey for the night. Again, the whole wildlife atmosphere in this episode is very well handled. As meanwhile, Tanya may have found her next guy giving her attention, as Mia and Lucia have found their new friends in the form of Ethan and Cameron. And let's have fun. It's time to have a party, ladies and gentlemen. As we pivot over to what's going on with their wives, Harper is tripping as Daphne describes what men Cameron hangs himself around, which I think is key, because we see once she finds out how Cameron is, we know that Harper's like, well, he's with my husband, and we see that call that doesn't get picked up later. But let's talk about something that's a little bit awkward in this episode. Not awkward in a bad way. It's meant to be awkward purposefully, and I'm talking about our young lovebirds, Albie and Portia, who yet again, he takes her advice. He's changing for her, or at least attempting to, as he's getting aggressive, and he's not in a bad way, but he's trying to, he's kissing her, being a little bit more flirty with her, and she's very she's not liking it because she has her eyes on another guy. And I think he fits that bill of what she mentioned, who she normally likes, which is like the bad boy, right? As the guy, which he didn't really seem like a bad boy when he jumps in the water. Oh, I have to what do you say, sensitive nipples. I don't know if he's normally fits that quota, but she seemed to be very attracted to him, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's her type more so than what Albie is. As she cuts their night short, he's like, I'm kind of beat. I thought she was going to actually go back to the pool and hang out with him, but we didn't see that scene. We might see that next week or whatnot, but they cut their night short. But I just found it awkward because I saw the comments last week in regards to some people feel, and to each his own, some people feel like Albie is too nice, right? And my only pushback with that is I do believe his niceness. And the reason I say that is because he's seen two generations of his father and his grandfather not being, I don't say not being nice, but how they lie and they cheat and they deceive their wives. And maybe not as much as Bert, because I don't know if Albie knows as much about his granddad as he knows about his actual father, because they live in the same household. But I think that Albie wants to be different from his father, at least, because he doesn't want to have his family be broken up because their father had affairs. So I think he might be a good guy. I could be wrong. This could be a front, and it could be very much like Bert, who seems like a good old grandpa, but he has his dark secrets in the past. So very, very interested to see where all of this goes. But catching back up to Dom, who has the reverse shot of what happened to Harper earlier, getting those looks from the men, we see Dom at the bar, and he's getting some eyes from different women, the waitress and a couple other women. But he says, you know what? I'm going to have my drink. I'm going to go about my business and try to go on this path of being a new man. Meanwhile, going back to loneliness, we see Tanya by herself, and we see, I believe it's Tom Holland's the actor name. He's giving her an eye, and I believe he is going to be a part of the show because he is part of the main cast. Right now, she doesn't want anyone to bother her, but I think that they will cross paths probably next week, if I would imagine, right? But let's wrap this episode up here, ladies and gentlemen, as we end with Harper questioning if Cameron has cheated on Daphne, and she says at least she knows of one time that he did. And I love this response here because she goes into, she doesn't have any resentment, but also she doesn't feel like a victim. I love that line because there are so many people that I know, and I'm sure that you all know, that are in these toxic relationships. And I'm not saying that Daphne and Cameron are in a toxic relationship, but I'm just using an example. We know people that are in these relationships, and whether it's the partner cheating on another partner or vice versa, or there's an abusive relationship, or whether verbally or physically, and then you see that other person going to their friends, or you might be that friend like, I hate them, they do this, they do that. It's like you're playing a victim. Just check out of this relationship. No one's forcing you to be here. It almost seems like you want to be in this relationship to have this type of drama and toxicity and have something to talk about. So I love that Daphne said, I don't resent him. I have my own, she didn't say she has affairs, but she has her own things, that hobbies and things that interest her. And it doesn't bother her that he might have cheated on her once. Now, I don't know if this means that they're in an open relationship, like a, entanglement or whatnot, but I like how she used, don't feel sad for me, don't feel bad for me, I'm not a victim, I know what type of relationship I'm in. I really love that. And I say all that to say this, Daphne's becoming one of my favorite characters, man. Number one, that actress she plays sweet so well, and also kind of plays ditzy at times when you first meet her, but I'm really loving the performance from her. But wrapping all of this up, the moment of truth comes down to Ethan as he's having a fun time, and the drinks are flowing, the clothes are coming off, and the fun is happening, and it's literally knocking on his door. He lets the fun in, but you can see he's wasted, but he's also very uncomfortable with what's going on, which brings me back to, is he maybe not into women? Because we see, I love this shot here, which we're going to get into, but Mia walks up to him, gives him a kiss. He denies her. And then we get the score. It's like, it was almost like not a horror film, but it was this haunting music going on while he was doing that. And I love the shot where he's sitting on the ground, and in the background, which is blurry, we see Cameron and Lucia. They're definitely having a good time.
To her, she carries that off.
Oh, Jesus.
So if you put one of those outside of your house, what are you saying?
A warning to husbands, babe. Screw around and you'll end up buried in the garden.
Smoking a cigarette and his wife's calling. Again, was he watching Cameron having sex because I don't know if he's attracted to him? Again, I might be so off with that commentary with him maybe being either bisexual or into men or gay. That might be wrong, but I definitely feel like he's not attracted to his wife. Or maybe he's, asexual? Maybe he's not attracted to women. Not that he doesn't have sex with his wife, but maybe he doesn't have, that's not a priority to him, is to have sex and have those type of relationships. So I'm very curious on what you all think about that. As we see, again, his wife's calling him, he doesn't pick up, and I can only imagine what's going on in Harper's mind after finding out from Daphne, Cameron is a man that likes to have fun. So I think that they're planting the seeds, and back to loneliness, she's by herself in that big old beautiful room that she's staying in. So, and also when they end I love the score in the soundtrack of the show when they end with that beautifully composed music, which is just some of the best music I've heard in a very long time. We fade out. So I really enjoyed this episode. If you couldn't tell, male masculinity, the bull elephant conversation, how females feel about themselves in this world, and how Daphne's not a victim. I love that. But also the changing of who you are to appease someone else. Like I had mentioned with what Albie's doing, with Portia's being used, with Dom trying to make a change, with Greg using Tanya. I love all those pieces. And again, y'all, we know that someone's going to die. The question is who, and who's going to leave this vacation together or divorced or not together. Only time will tell. Very big fan of this episode, but I want to know your thoughts in the comments. Pros, cons, deeper meanings, favorite moments, funniest moments, things that maybe didn't work for you all. Let's have those conversations in the comments below. If you stuck around to this point in the video, do me a favor, put hashtag bull elephant, put it in the comments. You all have been awesome. Before you all leave, make sure to like this video, share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and of course, subscribe to the channel. As you can see on the screen now, come and join the community. Check out my other reviews for the White Lotus. Check out my most recent review, and we'll see you all on the next breakdown.